Welcome, JNUC 2021. Thank you for attending our presentation, Managing Macs in a Windows World. My name is Christopher Shasi. I am a Jamf expert at Rocketman. I'm also a Jamf integrator, and I've assisted hundreds of companies in successfully implementing Jamf Pro over the years. With me is Shanda Brabeck. She is a product manager and change manager at Silverlane Technologies. Shanda has successfully implemented hundreds of projects over her career and specializes specifically in projects that are over budget, past due, and have come to a screeching halt. That's when she gets brought in to bring that project over the finish line. Now, if you've attended any of our Rocketman monthly Jamf meetups or seen my presentation from last year, you'll know that my presentations typically dive straight into the technical weeds right away and stay there. This presentation, however, is going to be a bit different. And there's a really good reason that Shanda's working with me on this presentation, because for the next 30 minutes, I challenge you to think like a change manager. And there's three concepts that we want to teach you during this presentation. The first one is to begin with the end in mind. So when you start a project, think about what the end is going to look like. Once you get there, create a change management roadmap that's going to bring you to success. And then once you have the finish of the project done, the end of the project done, we're going to talk about building sustainable success for the future. Before I hand the reins off to Shanda and dive into that, I want to talk a bit more about the problem that you're probably facing right now. And it's that your large enterprise is already set up for Windows, but not for Macs. So we're going to go through a scenario of a company called Acme Corporation. Note, this is not a real company, but it's a company we're going to go through based on multiple examples of companies we worked with. So this is a Fortune 500 company. They have a lot of Windows computers, over 20,000 Windows computers, and just a spattering of Macs. So about 200 to 500, they're not really sure how many. And so far the Macs have been the Wild West, so they haven't had any type of management. This might be because they acquired a group of Macs in a recent acquisition, or maybe IT has just ignored them over the years because they didn't really know how to deal with them and they didn't want to deal with them. But recently leadership has gotten some pressure to put these Macs under the corporate fold. So the first thing we're going to talk about, and this is where kind of the problems start, is the issue of scoping. So the first people that are looking at this project are the stakeholders. And they're trying to figure out the best solution to manage these Apple devices, because whatever they're using for their Windows computers doesn't really manage it well. So they do a little research, and of course they decide that Jamf Pro is the best option. So they talk to a sales rep. That sales rep tells them, oh, if we sign the paperwork today, we'll be able to schedule a jumpstart in a month and you'll be good to go from there. So they think in their heads that this project is going to take about 1 month. Then the technical consultant gets involved. This might be a third party. They might work for the company. So maybe they are getting the jumpstart. So they finish the jumpstart, they go through that process, and then they're like, well, I know you thought that I was going to be good to go after this, but I still need to set up everything within Jamf. And that's going to take at least another 2 months. So they get that all set up. And then they're ready to implement the changes for the user. So that's when they get the change manager involved. And the change manager is like, well, I know you thought all you need to do was set up the technical components, but we still need to take the users into account. The users don't know this is happening. They're not on board with it. We don't even know if these changes that we're making are going to negatively affect their current workflows. It's going to be at least another 3 months. So that's where, from the get-go, right out of the gate, we have a project that the stakeholders think is going to take 1 month, but is actually going to take 6 times that amount to be successful. So right away, we're over budget, overdue on our project before we're even getting started. So today I want to focus the presentation on the change manager aspect. But before I do that, I do want to touch quickly on the technical aspects of it, because those are really important. If you don't get those done, you can't you don't have anything to implement to the users. So anytime we work with a client, we like to look at three things before we get started: the infrastructure, the cybersecurity requirements, and the user applications we need to deploy. So for Acme Corporation, they had Cisco ICE as their internal server that they were using, and we had multiple MDMs. So we needed to figure out the problem of implementing multiple MDMs with Cisco ICE. I actually had a JNUC presentation on how we accomplished this last year, so check that out if you're interested. We also had to integrate their local AD server with Jamf Pro, specifically Jamf Cloud. So in order to do that, we needed to set up Infrastructure Manager. And then lastly, they had a machine certificate that needed to be on each computer to connect to Wi-Fi. So we needed to set up the ADCS connector in order to do that. Next, we'd like to look at the cybersecurity requirements that they have. So for Acme Corporation, they had CrowdStrike as an endpoint protection solution, McAfee as a web proxy, and Jamf Connect in order to integrate their local account on the computer with their Active Directory password, or specifically Azure AD password. And then lastly, some basic security stuff. So they want the computers to be file vault encrypted, and they also wanted a screen lock after 20 minutes of inactivity on the computer. And then lastly, we looked at the user applications. So for Acme Corporation, we were at the beginning implementing just a large development department. So developers, luckily are very good at managing their own applications. So they were able to, we didn't have to do a whole lot to get their base application set up, but there were a couple applications we wanted to deploy. One was Office 365, because specifically they were using other resources like Slack and stuff like that, and we were trying to get them more under the corporate fold. So we wanted to put that on the computers to make it a little bit easier for them to use it. And then more importantly, we had to get Cisco AnyConnect on the computer so they could connect to the local VPN to get to all their development resources. And from a technical perspective for Acme Corporation, I crushed it as an engineer. We got the infrastructure set up right away. We adhered to their cybersecurity requirements, and we even had a seamless zero-touch provisioning workflow in place. So everything was awesome, and that was not an easy task. But then we sent user instructions to enroll, and we were thinking it would take about a week for everyone to get enrolled. We were going to be there as support if they needed it, and that's when things came to a screeching halt. And that's when I had to get Shanda involved, because everyone was throwing their hands up in the air saying, this Jamf thing is breaking everything we're doing, we can't do our jobs, and we're not going to be implementing this in our department.
Awesome. Thanks,
so now I'm
Chris.
going to turn it over to Shanda. Go ahead, Shanda.
Thanks, Chris. So if you know Chris at all, if you've been on any of his connects, or if you've had the pleasure of working with him, you know he genuinely hit it out of the park. So why wasn't that enough? It really comes back to a couple of things. The title of this workshop: you're attempting to manage MacBooks in a very settled and established Windows world. And there's also this mindset expansion that has to happen as we bring in MacBook management into a company. It has to happen many ways across the business, from the infrastructure, cybersecurity, support services, and even the MacBook users themselves. So there are many, as you can see from this little picture on the screen, there's many different facets that we could talk about for change management, but we're not going to talk about everything. We just want to hone in on a few things, a few key things that will help you to be successful as you implement Jamf management in your business. So if we think like a change manager, the very first thing Chris had mentioned is you have to begin with the end in mind. And so that one is our very first concept. It might be a little different than what you're thinking, but we'll dive in a bit. The next one is to create a change management roadmap. This roadmap is important. I know you think technical roadmaps, but there's some change management key things we need to tuck into that roadmap to make things really successful and sustainably successful. And the last one that Chris had mentioned before, building that sustainable success. So what does it mean to begin with the end in mind? We're going to go ahead and talk about that. If we look at beginning with the end in mind, a lot of times we want to quantify things that are measurable, metrics. We might think, okay, the end of this initiative is X amount of MacBooks or users on the Jamf platform by this date. And that is an amazing, amazing and substantial milestone, but it's not the full picture. That concept of just getting something into the door is not going to carry you through for sustainable success. So let's talk through what it's going to take. I like to get everything out on the table right when we start an initiative. I don't want there will be some surprises and there will be some changes, but it's great to talk through the whole process from beginning to end. Those technical changes that Chris had mentioned already, all of the challenges that he faced with those, all of the different components that were required for this platform, we need to look at all of them. What is it going to take to get there? How are we going to get there? That's going to be part of your roadmap. The second thing though, and this is pretty big, is the MacBook support model. And if we're looking at the MacBook support model, sorry, a little delay in the slide there, you may be building from the ground up. You might just have a clean slate. You're deciding to bring MacBooks into your environment, and this Jamf platform is the way that you're going to do it. So if you're doing that and you're starting from the ground up, this could be simpler, but make sure that you're thinking through still all these different components that we have to manage. If you're going to set up a desk or support, you have to look at your current support model and see if they are equipped, if you have the manpower who knows about MacBooks, if they are familiar with the Apple OS or not. And if you're like our Acme Pretend Corporation that we're talking through here today, and they've inherited or acquired a pocket of these MacBooks, or maybe like Chris mentioned, the IT just to this point has not been willing to own the MacBook management, you're starting at a different space. You are in that Windows world, the established Windows world. Your support is centered and focused toward the Windows world. So as you're building your roadmap, you need to be thinking through what it's going to take to support these MacBooks coming in. And not just how are we going to train our support staff, which, by the way, you may need to do two separate kinds of training. One just solely on the Apple OS. There's a lot of changes between a Windows OS and a Mac OS, all the way down to the keyboard shortcuts. So it might be beneficial for them to have this Apple training and then also to learn about the Jamf platform and all the ins and outs of what that means to an end user. But you also have to train your users to use the support system. In this scenario, when Chris and I were working with this user group, they were not used to reaching out to standard corporate processes. They didn't reach out to the desk. They kind of inter-supported each other. So when we were introducing this support model, we had to consider not just training the support staff, but also training our users how to use the support mechanism we were putting in place. Okay, so let's look at the next component. Whoops, sorry about that. MacBook user adoption. I can't quantify this one. This is huge. As Chris mentioned, he hit the technical components out of the park. And there were a lot. There were a lot of technical challenges ahead of him to create this platform that would make infrastructure and cybersecurity very happy. But the one consideration that didn't get folded in until much later, and too late, usually, is this MacBook user adoption. My dad always said, you either pay now or you pay later. And from a user adoption perspective, you do. If you haven't taken the time to get to know your users, to know how they're using their MacBook, what their workflows look like, what kind of access points they might need, what concerns do they have about this management, they're in it for what's in this for me. And while we can sell to stakeholders and also to other technical people that all the benefits that this platform may bring and provide to users, we also need to think through how we're going to convey the value here to our end users. What value is there for them? And Chris did a fantastic job using scripts and self-service. I'll let him talk about that a little bit later. But there was a lot of value here for our users. But if they didn't understand the value, they were going to be resistant to change. So it's really important that you engage your users early, that you have a voice of the customer, not just the voice of your stakeholders or those who are contributing to what requirements belong on the platform, but you need a direct line to understand the user adoption piece here, the user needs, wants, and concerns. All right, so we've already talked about now the bigger picture about what that beginning and the end could be. There's still a little bit more to come for long-term success. So we'll get to that. But I hope so far you've been thinking through, what does our company need? Where are they starting? What does our support model look like? How engaged are our infrastructure and cybersecurity? How on board are they to not just get this through the door, but what's going to happen down the road when they have a version update and we end up having some changes needing to be made or decisions needing to be made? So create this roadmap, thinking through kind of some of what I consider, the technical components are the hard components. The people components can be thought of as the softer components. Make sure your roadmap contains both. If it doesn't, you will hit a roadblock at some point. All right, now we're going to move into, sorry, it's not letting me change my slide. There it is. There we go. Thanks, Chris. As Chris mentioned, he's done this a lot, and I have been engaged with him. I've had the privilege to work with him a lot, but also other kinds of projects and initiatives as well. And these three things we're about to talk about and the scenarios we're going to share with you are actual. Those are taken from real life scenarios, somewhat married between different companies. But the first thing that I want to talk about is establishing key points of contact. Now, Chris had points of contact. He was getting, this is the requirement that we need for cybersecurity. Here's the script to be able to utilize it. But those key points of contact, you can't just have collaborators. You need to have decision makers as well, because you're going to hit roadblocks at different points, and you need to be able to bring the right people to the table. So I would encourage you, and it's completely okay for you to ask your collaborative person who you've been working with, hey, if something came up, who would be the person that would need to make a call on this? Who is my decision maker in these kind of scenarios? Go ahead and take some time. Schedule a quick meeting. Make sure they understand what you're doing here with the Jamf platform. It doesn't have to be anything long. It can be 15 to 30 minutes where you just simply give them visibility. But these key points of contact can save you down the road.
Yep. So this was a really important thing for this project that I was working on with Acme, because the people I was talking to, like Shanda said, they weren't the decision makers. And we were running into an issue where the users were being blocked from doing their essential job by this McAfee web proxy. And cybersecurity was saying, we need to have this in place. And the users were saying, we can't do our job with this in place. And I had no one to talk to that could actually make a decision either way. So Shanda was able to put me in touch with the right people who could actually say, well, maybe we can make some small changes to this so that they can do their work and be secure.
That brings us to the next point, this collaborative success planning. We can't do it on our own as implementers. You could build your Jamf platform, you can try to roll it out, you can have all of your processes and everything established, but if you haven't collaborated, you are going to get resistance, and most of the time, it's not going to be good. You're going to end up at an impasse. Now, in this scenario that Chris just shared, we had the cybersecurity team saying, this is the line in the sand, this is our standard, they're going to have to find a way or, not be on Jamf. And then I have, our end user pool who's had a little bit of experience here trying out Jamf. They're frustrated, they're ready to toss in the towel. They don't want to be managed in the first place, So it's interesting how these dynamics come together. Stakeholders had heard their users complaining. They had heard the value of this Jamf platform. They're confused, they're frustrated, they need this to be resolved. Anytime you reach an impasse, you're going to lean on your key points of contact. I highly recommend that you break off into individual groups. I started with cybersecurity. I knew them well, but I was also looking at them and I'm saying, okay, this is your line in the sand. What is it offering? What protection? Are we looking at endpoint protection? What is your end goal with this specific tool? And they said, this is our end goal and we have to protect the corporate IP. This is our job. And I said, okay, great. Is there any other tool that we could use that might be just as effective? No, this is our tool, we have to be here. Okay, we have a third-party contract, a support contract. Can you tap into those resources? I know we have not used, or that company had not yet used, any resourcing for MacBook support, but these resources, these key support contracts that you have within your organization, they reach wider than than just your organization. They have probably encountered other scenarios with MacBooks, and sure enough, they had some potential solutions. So we're starting to stir up ideas on their side. Then I went over to the end users and I said, look, let's get together. I understand your frustration. I'm hearing the concern and the need. How can we fix it? Are you willing to come back and explore a potential solution here and do some testing for us? And then, of course, to the stakeholders saying, you know what, I think we can find a solution here. Bring them all together in a meeting, start as a neutral party, explain this is the standard and this is why it's the standard, this is what it's doing for our end users, it's not working. How do we find a middle ground? And you can raise some potential ideas that have already been developed or started in those smaller conversations. And sure enough, we were able to work out a workshop where we had cybersecurity at the table with the complete representation that we needed. We had our end users at the table, we had some stakeholders who were listening or standing by, and we had that third-party vendor come in, and Chris was able to work masterfully with them to be able to find this middle ground, this solution that would work for everyone. And, it takes some effort. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but those key points of contact, that collaborative success planning, not just trying to plan it all ourselves, matters. And those two core things will now help you to navigate many things. The last thing, and probably again, one of the most important things, once you make it past all those hurdles, if you have not prepared your end users for this change, or if they're coming at us, like with Chris, they had heard this Jamf platform is horrible. I don't want to migrate. I'm not volunteering to be an early adopter. I can't do this. I don't have time in my day to waste for things to be down. And it took us more effort. We were starting at a deficit, at a point of distrust. We had to build that trust. We started with leadership. It's always good to start from the top down. We had key team leads, and we held workshops with them, and we said, look, we have this amazing automated work stream, but we also need to make sure that you understand what it represents. And we walked them through. Chris did a phenomenal job running these workshops. If you're ever curious about how this works in more detail than we have time to say, make sure you reach out to him because he did an amazing job here. Screen sharing, walking them through, making sure they understood how things worked. Once we got those team leads, they're on the Jamf platform. They can do their work. They've tested all the applications. They're cruising along great. Then we had them bring it to their teams and say, hey, this does work. There is benefit here. Let's do it. We're going to volunteer. Our team's going to do it. And they helped champion it for us. And then, of course, we did multiple smaller workshops for these users. Now, normally you don't have to do as many as Chris and I had to do, but it was in a state and different corporate atmospheres will present differently. You could sometimes just train a trainer, train those team leads, have them roll it out. Then you can just say, okay, we've rolled it out to this many. The rest of them can use the automated process because we have enough user adoption and people understand it. Chris, I'm going to pass over to you. Show them the Jamf enrollment instructions and what you did with those workshops.
Absolutely. Thanks, Shanda. I'll probably have to go quickly through these next couple slides, but yes, as Shanda said, we had to spend a lot of time on these workshops. I think for 250 users, we ran about 35 workshops, and they were an hour long. So when she says pay now or pay later, if you pay later, you're paying with dividends. We probably didn't need to do that much work, but we had the users didn't trust this platform, so we needed to work with them individually for them to trust this platform. But yeah, I set up a VM, I screen shared, and I walked them through the Jamf enrollment, even though it was a zero-touch provisioning workflow, because we wanted to give the users confidence that this was going to work. So I would have them click on a link in an email with instructions that looked a little bit like this, download the CA certificate and MDM profile. And then I told them to wait 1 to 5 minutes for that DEP notify window to pop up to lead them through the rest of the installation. Then it would install their core applications, CrowdStrike, Jamf Connect, and Microsoft Office, anything else they needed. And then I would wait and prompt them to connect to VPN for Cisco AnyConnect. The reason I did that is because McAfee required local resources to enable to install. So once they connected, it would then start installing McAfee, and then I would prompt them to log into Jamf Connect and show them how that worked. Then we would open up self-service and walk them through the troubleshooting documentation that we put together and any other quick fixes and stuff like that that they have available to them. So that's kind of what the workshop looked like. It took about 30 minutes of installation and then another 30 minutes just going through self-service and answering questions so that the users felt like they were being heard. So I'll give it back to Shanda to talk about long-term success.
Awesome. So we've talked about this concept of short-term or long-term success. Short-term success is getting it in the door. That is a win, and it should be acknowledged as such. But if you're building toward long-term success, you have to keep in mind what's going to happen after it's in the door. What kind of processes do we need to have in place for add, remove, change? What kind of testing procedures are in place for our cybersecurity team? Chris and I, we actually met with management and got our cybersecurity team some MacBooks because they didn't know how to test on MacBooks. They needed something for them to see the user experience and see what broke and what was working well. And that was one of the key things that's helped us even to today. So create those processes, evaluate your environment, see what they should look like, create them, make sure they're in place, because eventually you're going to have a critical Apple security patch that you're going to have to push out, and you're going to have to make sure that you do it in a correct way. How are the users informed? Who makes approvals, etc. Next, ongoing Apple and Jamf training for users. You can't expect that it's a one and done. What about when there's a new OS? What if there's other significant changes happening? You're going to make sure that your users are informed, but also your support people need to be informed. Okay, Chris, I'm going to break it back to you. I want you to have a few minutes to talk about support and self-service.
Absolutely. Thanks, Shanda. So communication between the support tiers. So if we're Jamf engineers, we're tier 3 support. And sometimes you're doing tier 1, tier 2 support as well. Typically, we're working with a tier 1 team. So we want to make sure that we're bringing as much value to that tier 1 team as possible. And we do that with self-service quick fixes. Now, I could spend an entire presentation on how to create these, but the two things you want to ask anytime you get a tier 1 ticket into your help desk is, could other users experience this issue? If they could, well, then we do the fun tier 3 work of asking, is there an automated way that we can fix this? If there is, we can put that quick fix into self-service. Now, I use self-service more for this than anything else. I'm not typically putting a giant application catalog in self-service. It is quick fixes for the users so that they can start to learn to fix problems themselves. And I'm also teaching tier 1 oftentimes to lead users into self-service rather than trying to show them how to fix it on their computer or taking control and fixing it. So with that, we have a couple minutes. Thanks a lot for listening. Shanda, I'll kick it back off to you to say any final comments.
Chris and I are pretty passionate about this. We want you to be successful. I hope that we've maybe expanded your minds just a little bit. Here, Chris is a huge resource for you. If you're not plugged into his Jamf trainings and extra things he has going on, you need to. It's worth your time. Our users plug into those scripts and use them all the time. They love it, especially our developers, and good stuff. So thanks so much. You can find us on LinkedIn if you're looking for either of us. And Chris, back to you.
Yep. I'm also on the Mac Admin Slack under the name Rocket Man if you want to reach out to me personally. Like Shanda said, we have a monthly Mac Admin meetup specifically focused on Jamf. So if you're around, please join that. It's virtual, so you can join it from anywhere in the country, really anywhere in the world if you'd like to. And if you need any assistance with Jamf, you can always reach out to me directly because that's what we do at Rocket Man. So if you're looking to get a Jamf project over the finish line, or if you need someone to manage Jamf for you, reach out to me at chris@rocketman.tech. That's chris@rocketman.tech. And I'd love to talk to you about how we can work together on that type of project. We also have some great handouts for you available for this. I have a lot of those self-service quick fixes in there and different resources that will be great for you to use. So make sure you check that out. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation today. Reach out in the comments or DMs or however we do this at this conference. Love to hear from you.